No rancher would wed the woman with burn-scarred hands, the blind fiddler. The bow was horsehair and pine rosin, and I'd worn it down to almost nothing by the time I rode into Cutter's Flat. That's the first thing I remember about that town, not the smell of it, not the sound of boots on a boardwalk, not the way a man shifts when he's looking at something he doesn't know how to look at. The bow. I was sitting outside Prentice's feed store with my back against the wall, and I was drawing it slow across the E string trying to find where the wolf tone lived. Some fiddles have a note in them that sounds wrong no matter what you do. Sounds like something dying inside the wood. You learn to avoid it or you learn to work around it, and I'd spent 20 years working around the wolf tone in that fiddle the way a man learns to walk around a low beam in a dark room. You don't need to see it. You know it's there. I'd gone blind in my 37th year. Not sudden. The way winter comes, first just earlier dark, then frost where there wasn't frost before, then one morning the world is simply gone. 3 years it took. The last thing I saw clearly was my own hands on the strings. I remember thinking that was a mercy, though I didn't feel merciful about it for a long time after. I was 51 when I came to Cutter's Flat. That's 14 years of learning to be something other than what I'd been. I'd been a ranch hand in my youth, then a trail cook, then a wrangler for an outfit out of Laramie, and I was good at all of it, not the best, but the kind of man other men trusted, which is a different thing and in some ways better. When the sight went, I couldn't do any of it. What I could do was play. I'd played since I was 9 years old, learned from my uncle who'd learned from nobody, just figured it out the way you figure out anything when there's nothing else to do on a long winter. So that's what I became. A man who played fiddle for his supper and slept in barns and liveries, and the occasional spare room when a widow took pity or a barkeep ran short of musicians for a Saturday. Cutter's Flat was a Thursday in October. I remember because the feed store owner, Prentice, told me the date when he brought me water without being asked. That was unusual. Most men either ignored me entirely or talked too loud and too slow, the way people do when they've decided you're broken in all the ways that matter. Prentice just said, "It's cold for October, day before the 14th, and handed me the cup and went back inside. I liked him for that. I played on the boardwalk for 2 hours, made enough for a meal and a little over. Then I heard the door to the general store across the road open and close, and a woman's voice saying something short and flat to someone inside, and the door close again, hard. Feet on the steps, not small feet, a woman who walked like she owned the ground under her. She stopped near me. I could tell from the shadow, not sight, just warmth and sound, the way the air changes when something fills a space near you. I kept playing. An old reel I'd learned in Kansas, nothing fancy. She said, "You're new." "Passing through," I said. "Where to?" "Haven't decided." She was quiet for a moment. I finished the reel and let the bow rest. She said, "You play at the Meridian tonight. Clyde Barrow keeps the place. He'll feed you and give you $1.50. "I know what Clyde Barrow is," she said. I hadn't said anything about what he was. "He waters his whiskey and he'll take 1/3 of what you make above the flat rate." "Most of them do." "I know," she paused. "There's a church supper Friday. Pastor Elms pays $2 flat and you keep what people give you after. Better deal." I turned my head toward her, not that it helped. "You're not the pastor." "No." "Why are you telling me this?" "A beat, then. Because Clyde Barrow will also tell people you're a charity case, and they'll throw coins at your feet instead of in the hat, and you'll spend the night thinking about it." I thought about that specific. I've watched him do it to others. "All right," I said. "Friday then. Where do I sleep until Friday?" She said, "There's a hay barn behind the livery on the east side of Keller Street. Warmer than it looks. The livery man, Amos, he won't bother you if you don't bother the horses." "I don't bother horses." "Good." She moved away. Feet on the planking, heading north. I called after her, "I don't know your name." She stopped. "Nora Vass." "Harlan Cade," I said. She didn't say anything to that, just walked on. I sat there with the fiddle across my knee and the cold coming up from the ground through my coat, and I thought about the specific knowledge in her voice, not soft, not hard, just exact. The kind of knowing that comes from watching things you aren't part of. The hay barn was warmer than it looked. I lay on my back in the dark, which is just dark, the same dark as everything, and I thought about her voice. You learn voices the way a naturalist learns birds. Not just pitch and timbre, but the whole character of a voice, what it holds back, where it speeds up, where it goes flat because the person has said a thing so many times it no longer requires feeling. Nora Vass's voice was careful. Careful the way a person is careful when they've been careless before and paid for it. Not timid, not afraid, just measured. I slept. In the morning, Amos, the livery man, brought me coffee without asking and said, "Miss Vass told me you were back here." I said I appreciated it. He said, "She's particular about who she helps. You must have passed something." I didn't ask what. I spent the day learning the town by walking it. That's how you know a place, not looking at it, because I couldn't, but walking it. The grade of the road where the boards were loose, the sound of the alley between the cooper and the tanner, the smell of the bakery 2 doors past the post office, the particular silence of the church at midday, which is a different silence than an empty building. A church holds all the prayers said in it. I believe that. Not religiously exactly, just acoustically. The air is different. I heard about Nora Vass the way you hear about anyone in a small town. Not all at once, in pieces from different mouths. Amos mentioned she ran the general store since her father died, 2 years back. The baker's wife, when I stopped to buy a heel of bread, said she was a hard woman to get to know. The blacksmith, who spoke to me sideways because I was standing near his shop and he was being polite but not inviting, said she'd had offers, by which he meant for the store, not for herself, though maybe both, and turned them all down. Then he said, quieter, like he was deciding whether to say it, burned up in a fire when she was 17. Both hands. Most men around here, it bothers them. I don't think it should, but it does. I said I didn't see what the fuss was about. He laughed short and sharp. Then he said, "No, I suppose you don't." And he went back to his work, and I thought I'd maybe made a friend. Friday came. The church supper was in the social hall attached to the back of the building. Long tables, 30 or 40 people, the smell of roasted meat and corn and something sweet underneath, a pie, I thought, or maybe 2. Children running and stopping and running. The particular buzz of a room that hasn't started yet. Pastor Elms was a compact man with a preacher's voice, which is to say it carried without effort, but he didn't use it on me. Just said, "Glad to have you, Mr. Cade. Set up in the corner by the window if you like." I said I'd need someone to guide me to the corner by the window. He said, "Oh, yes, of course," and guided me himself, hand on my elbow, not gripping, just indicating. A good guide, most people pull. I played through the supper. Old tunes mostly, hymn melodies dressed up as reels, the kind that settle a room without announcing themselves. I played a waltz and heard 1 or 2 couples move. I played a slow air I'd written myself, which had no name. I didn't know what it was called. It was just a thing I played when I needed to remember that music was mine and not just a service. Partway through, I heard her. Not her voice this time, her movement. The particular way her feet hit the floor, that same weight and steadiness. She was seated maybe 12 feet to my left. I knew because when I played the slow air she went very still, which you notice when everything else in a room is in minor motion. Afterward, when the room was thinning, she came to where I was sitting. She said, "That last one, the slow one, what's that called?" "I don't know," I said. "I haven't named it." "Why not?" "I thought about it. I wrote it for my wife. She died. Seems presumptuous to name something like that." Nora Vass was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long ago?" 9 years. "Were you blind when she died?" 2 years gone by then, she stayed. I hadn't meant to say that last part. It came out on its own. Nora said, of course she stayed. I turned toward her. You'd be surprised. She didn't answer that right away. Then, no, she said, I wouldn't. I understood then something about why she'd told me about the church supper. Not charity, not pity, something else. The recognition of a person who has been sorted out of the ordinary running of things and has made a life in the space that's left. I asked if I could buy her a cup of coffee. She said the kitchen in the social hall was probably still hot, and it wasn't buying if someone else made it. We sat at the end of one of the long tables and drank the coffee and talked until the pastor politely ran out of reasons to stay in the building. That is not a short amount of time for a pastor. What she told me about the fire. She was 17. It was June. Her family's barn. A lantern and bad luck in the same fraction of a second that changes everything. She'd gotten 2 horses out. That was her own telling of it, plain and quick, as though it were a sentence she'd practiced saying without ceremony because ceremony made it worse. 2 horses and the fire in her hands, the way they looked when it was over, and the doctor who said what doctors say in those moments, which is true but doesn't help. And then years of people who couldn't quite look at her hands the way she needed to be looked at. I said, how do you mean, the way you needed to be looked at? She said, like they were part of me. I said, yes. She was quiet. I said, I know what it is to be something people look around instead of at. She said, it's not the same. I said, no, not the same, but not unrelated either. She thought about that. I heard her turn her cup on the table, then she said, what do your hands look like? I held them out. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then I felt her take my right hand in both of hers, and I knew then what I hadn't thought through yet, that she'd been so careful to describe things to me without seeing them, careful not to make me feel the absence. My hands were calloused from the strings, the fingernails kept short on the left hand for fretting. I felt the particular texture of her grip, the skin pulled taut in places, smooth and hard in ways that weren't the usual wear. She held my hand the way you hold a tool you understand, not gentle, exactly, certain. She set it down. She said, you have good hands for this work. I said, so do you. That landed differently than I'd meant it, or maybe exactly as I'd meant it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was close, and it was the first time I heard anything in her voice that wasn't measured and careful, and it was worth the whole trip to Cutter's Flat. I stayed past Friday. That's how it always began, I learned later. Men would come through. Some of them would see the store and think about the store. A few would see Nora and look past the hands and make it 2 or 3 weeks, even a month. Then something would shift. A word from someone in town, or their own discomfort building up, or just the realization that Nora Vass was not a woman who softened to make a man feel easier, and they'd find a reason to move on. I had no way to see her hands. I want to be plain about that. I couldn't see them, and that is not the same thing as not knowing they were there, or not knowing what they meant to her. I knew. She told me, and I'd felt them. What I didn't have was whatever it is that lives in the eye, the thing that flickers when a person looks at something that doesn't fit their picture of how things should be. Whatever that is, I didn't have it and I didn't miss it. What I had was her voice and her walk, and the way she said things exactly once without repeating herself, and the fact that she had thought, while I was sitting on that boardwalk on a Thursday in October, about what would be good for me specifically, and had made sure I knew it. That's a thing a person does when they care about something, whether or not they say so. I played at the church supper the following Friday too, and the one after. In November she invited me to eat supper at her house on a Sunday. She made a pot roast and it was good. The table had a candle, she told me so. I don't know why, but I was glad she did. We talked about her father who had built the store in what she called the lean years, meaning the first years, when Cutter's Flat was barely a wide place in the road. She talked about him the way you talk about a person who you've made peace with being gone, not without grief, but with room around the grief. I talked about the trail, the years before, the country I'd crossed and couldn't describe any more except by feel and sound and smell, which is still a great deal of country. She said, "Do you miss seeing it?" I said, "Every day, and then some days I don't." She said, "What's different about those days?" I said, "When I'm playing and the music's right, or when someone's talking and I can hear exactly what they mean." She didn't say anything to that, but her chair moved just slightly closer. The winter that year came early and hard. By December the road south was unreliable, and the road north was a decision you didn't make lightly. I wasn't going anywhere. The town had gotten used to me by then in the way small towns get used to anything unusual, first with caution, then with a kind of sideways pride. The way Cutter's Flat had a blind fiddler who played like something you'd hear in a real city, and wasn't that something? Amos gave me a room above the livery in exchange for 3 evenings of playing at the social hall per month. It was a fair trade. I had a cot and a wood stove and enough quiet to think. I spent time with Nora most days. Not all day. She had the store and I had whatever I had, the practicing and the walking and the keeping of myself. But most afternoons she'd close up at 5, and I'd come by, and we'd sit in the kitchen behind the store, and she'd tell me what had come in that week, which goods and which news, and I'd tell her what I'd heard from people on the street, which was often more than she got, because people say things to a blind man they'd never say to a sharp-eyed woman who runs a store and remembers everything. I won't say it wasn't complicated. It was. There were things she didn't say and things I didn't push on, and there were evenings when she went quiet in a way that meant she was deciding something, and I'd wait, and sometimes she'd decide to speak and sometimes she wouldn't, and I'd go home not knowing which I preferred. In January, there was a man named Cortland who came to town with money and a wagon outfit and a plan to buy up 3 parcels south of the creek. He had a way of talking that took up all the room in a conversation. I heard him at Prentice's one afternoon explaining his plans to anyone who'd stand still long enough, and then I heard him go quiet when I came in, the way men do when they realize the person they're talking past might be listening. He came to the store twice in the first week. I know because Nora mentioned it without dwelling on it, the way she mentioned weather. The second time, I was in the back room helping Nora organize a shipment of dry goods. She'd describe what was in each crate and I'd count and stack. We heard Cortland come in, the bell above the door, his particular walk, which was the walk of a man who thought the floor should be grateful. He bought some tobacco and then he talked. Not long, but I heard him say in the voice of a man who believes he is being generous, "Miss Vass, you are a fine-looking woman. A man could overlook a thing or two." The silence after that had a shape. I kept my hands on the crate in front of me. Nora said, "Mr. Cortland, I'm going to ask you to pay for the tobacco and go." He laughed, not mean, just dismissive. "No offense meant." "Some taken," she said. "Go." The bell rang again when he left. I didn't say anything. After a moment she came back to the dry goods and handed me the next crate and said, "Burlap on the left, muslin on the right." And we kept working. I set the crate down and turned toward her and I said, "Nora." "Harlan, I've been here since October. I know when you got here. And I don't intend to move on." She was very still. I could tell by the sound of the room. I said, "I know what I am, and I know what I'm not, and I know you've got reasons to be careful about a man who says something like that. But I want to say it plainly so there's no deciding later whether I meant it." She said, "What are you saying plainly?" "That you are the best part of my days and I'd like to see, I'd like you to know that whatever you decide I'm not going anywhere. I don't have a crate full of overlooking. I have nothing to overlook. I just have you, the way you are, and that's what I mean." The room was very quiet. She said, "Harlan, come here." I stepped toward her and she put her hands, both of them. I felt the whole particular landscape of them, on either side of my face, and she held my face the way you hold something you mean to keep, and she said, "You are not nothing. You are not a case, and you are not a charity, and you are not a man passing through." I put my hands over hers. I could feel where the scars ended and where her warmth began, and it was no kind of map I'd ever need because I already knew it. She said, "I'm not a woman who says things she doesn't mean." I said, "I know that." She said, "Good, then you know that I mean this." And she leaned her forehead against mine, and we stood there in the back of the store with the January cold seeping under the door and the smell of burlap and flour and lamp oil all around us. And I thought, this is the thing. Not the house, and not the money, and not the pair of working eyes I would never have again. This is the thing that makes a man feel like he is standing on solid ground. We were married in March on a Saturday in the church, where I'd first played for supper. Pastor Elms was pleased. I could hear it in his voice. The whole service he sounded like a man who has been waiting for a particular piece of news for a long time. Amos gave me a hat. I don't know why. It was a good hat, he said. "It's brown and it's got a slight curl to the brim." And I said, "Thank you, Amos." And he said, "Just wanted you to know what you were wearing on the day." I appreciated that. The blacksmith, whose name I'd learned was Garrett, shook my hand after the ceremony and said quietly, "Good man," in the way men say that when they mean several things at once. I think he meant, "You didn't flinch, and she deserved someone who didn't flinch." The supper was in the social hall again, the same room where I'd first played for her. I played that evening too, not for money, just because it was mine to give. I played the slow air, the one I'd written for my first wife and hadn't named. Only this time, somewhere in the middle of it, it stopped being an elegy and became something else. I don't know exactly where the change was. I felt it, but I couldn't mark the measure. It just turned, the way things turn when the reason for them changes. Nora was sitting at the long table. I heard her chair push back, and then she was standing just off to my left, not speaking, just there. Present. I finished the tune and held the last note until it faded to nothing. She said quietly, so only I could hear, "What are you going to name it now?" I thought about it. I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "You've got time." I played one more tune after that, a reel, fast and high, and several people danced, and that was how the evening ended. Not with a speech or a quiet moment looking at the stars or any of the things that get arranged in a person's memory as the important thing that happened. Just music, and people moving, and Nora Vass, Nora Cade now, though it would take me some days to remember that, standing near enough that I could feel the warmth of her hand finding mine between one tune and the next. I stood there with the fiddle in one hand and her scarred, certain, particular hand in the other and thought, all right, this is what being found feels like. That was 11 years ago come March. I still play Fridays at the church. Less trail work now. Nora's store has done well, and she won't let me think of myself as a burden, and I've stopped arguing about it because she's right, and arguing with a woman who is right is a thing you give up eventually if you have any sense. I named the tune. I named it the week after the wedding when I was lying awake and it came to me and I thought, yes, that's it, that's the right name. I haven't told anyone what it's called. Nora knows. I told her one morning in the kitchen and she said the name and then she said it again, softer, and didn't say anything after that for a while, but I felt her hand on my back between my shoulders, just resting there, steady and warm, and that was enough. My hands are older now. The calluses are different, thicker in some places, less in others. The fiddle's wolf tone, the one I spent 20 years working around, Nora found a luthier passing through 4 years back and he fixed it. Just gone now. I didn't know how much of my playing had been built around avoiding that note until it wasn't there anymore. I think about that sometimes. How long a man can build his life around a thing he's learned to work around, and what it means when someone goes and fixes it. Not for him to be less than he was, just so the thing he's good at can be all the way itself. Outside the window right now, Nora told me before she went to open the store There's a hawk sitting on the fence post at the end of the yard, just sitting there in the morning. She described it the way she describes everything she thinks I'll want to know. The tuck of its wings, the way it's got its head turned slightly, like it's decided something. I thought I heard it just now. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, I know it's there.